My name is Michael Wells. I'm a member of the parish and have been for 20 years. I was a teacher across the street at Cleveland State, and in fact, what attracted me to Trinity was the history. And I was looking for a research project. I was interested in sacred landmarks. We had a sacred landmarks research group at Cleveland State. I was the co-director. We were always looking for things to do. And I knew Trinity had an archive. So that's what attracted me. And then many years later, this is where it got me. So, so I'm glad you showed up and you'll help us as we coordinate using the slides that we have. Not all of them tonight, and then we will gradually add slides to the presentation. And whoever is doing it will have the slides. And I have to say, to the unknown parishioner who in the 1970s came to Trinity with his camera, his scaffolding, his architectural drawing instruments, and gave us the visual record of the stained glass windows at Trinity. And his name is upstairs somewhere. I'm sorry I forgot it, but we owe that gentleman a lot because it takes a big effort to categorize the windows and even to get a record of them. And we could see that here. So this is his schema of the window. So the narthex in the front door is at the top, and you come in to the nave here, and then you move up here to the chapel, right, and where the choir, and then up to the choir. Over here is Cathedral Hall. And then he's got all the windows numbered, and then he has a separate list. So you can see right away that the windows are a complicated situation, even in this is supposedly the smallest cathedral in the country. It seats about 750 if we really cram people in. And it's situated right on the sidewalk, which was a big no-no when they built the cathedral. It's supposed to have a vast lawn, you know, with English aristocrats strolling around. So this is really an urban cathedral. So these are the windows. Now we're going to look just at a few along the nave aisle, and then we do have pictures, photographs, slides of other windows, so we can go to the next slide.
And these green ones are the ones being worked on.
That's right, sorry. The green ones are the ones being just a fraction of what's up there and what needs to be worked on. Because time is not kind to stained glass windows. So let's go to the next one. This is one of the oldest windows in Trinity Cathedral. This is on one of the transepts, the one that's over, if you're standing you're standing up at the pulpit and you're looking at the front door, this is the one to your left. It's at the extreme end of the transept. So let's just start with an old one. My friend Jim Whitney owns Whitney Stained Glass Studios. So back in the day, he did a lot of work here before he succumbed to cancer, a deadly menace for people that work in stained glass because of the lead. So he was marching me around the cathedral as I was trying to learn about the windows, and he said, "This is 15th century." I said, "Oh, you gotta be kidding me. You mean 16th century?" He said, "No, this is 15th century." I later found an attribute to this window in the 1913, I think it was the 1913 altar book. And that's another thing about Trinity windows. A lot of the information is in-house or even more sketchy. It's stories. I'll tell you something, how you can go out on a limb and have it sawed off listening to the story. Jim Whitney knew what he was talking about. So this was a 15th century window. Now, below this, you can't see it here, is a plaque to the Mather family. So, you know, this was something they were interested in, the whole cathedral. They had the wherewithal to pursue this. And I would say sometime, take the 1913 Alder book, sometime before World War I got really hot and the U-boats started sinking ships, he got this window out of England and shipped to the United States. Now, how they fitted in to the openings that were here at Trinity, I do not know. But Jim and the Alder book say this is a window from a place in England called Costasea Park. It was a private chapel, and that chapel got the window from a European church. So it went from a European church to the private chapel to here. Now it has all kinds of ornamentation. If you get up close to it, well, first of all, you can see the head of Jesus and a couple of flanking heads. You can see the two people here have books, so they're probably priests. You can see the woman with giving alms to the beggar, and you can see some people praying. Those are the central figures. But in the background, if you get up close, you got all these weird little pieces of glass with strange decorations. And those are broken pieces of stained glass that were too valuable to throw away. So they just push them aside, and when they do a major window like this, they stick them in and hope that the central image is enough to hold your attention. Most of the people who looked at this couldn't read. So it was the central images that gave them the story, or gave them the idea of what the church service was about, or the funeral, or the baptism, or whatever they were looking at. So this is a very early example of medieval stained glass, and we just got it sitting there in the transit, and it's not good for it. And sure enough, this has been repaired several times, but gravity starts the cane, the lead cane that holds the windows in, has to be soft enough that it doesn't bother the glass, but also sturdy enough to keep the window in. It starts to sink, and then the window starts to bulge, and you could see bulging on this window. I think this might be one that's being repaired. So this is a very old window, and look at the image, because I've been told, and I'm telling you, this is a 15th century window. This is the real goods.
Are those 4 pieces at the top part of the original window, or just the 6 panels?
Good question. I don't know. Good question.
Kind of think that maybe they were added into the frame of the window.
It could be, but there's one filing cabinet in the basement that supposedly has one of the Mather's records, and I haven't gotten in there yet. It's too, anyway, I won't go there, but so that might tell us some more.
The glass itself looks similar to that mosaic throughout the rest, though, so the glass still might be, yeah, interesting.
Okay, now we come to more modern stained glass. This is part of a set that runs down the nave aisle windows, both on the left side and the right side. On the left side is the childhood of Jesus. On the right side is his adult ministry. This this is part of the adult part of Now this is by Wilbur Burnham. We know who this is. Wilbur Burnham was a famous stained glass artist in Boston back in the early 20th century. He was very well known. And Trinity had a new dean, Chester, what was I saying? What was his name?
Oh, yeah. I can't
Adam
remember.
comes in. Anyway, he was now think about this. This is a Gothic cathedral. It's all pointy. It's Gothic architecture, medieval. I just showed you a medieval stained glass window from the 15th century. Chester Emerson. So Chester Emerson is appointed Dean of Trinity Cathedral in the early 1930s. He's a congregational minister from Detroit. Would you like to be on the search committee that came up with this? So he was known for his radio preaching in Detroit, which might be one of the reasons that he was appointed dean here, but they had to take a congregational minister and turn him into an Episcopal priest, and then turn him, well, first he had to be a deacon, then he had to be a priest, and then he had to be a dean. So, I mean, that happened pretty fast. And, you know, the Congregationalists go back to the early New England Pilgrims, and boy, this kind of thing was anathema. You didn't put this stuff in the church. It was white clapboard, open windows, open glass. And so we have a Congregationalist who goes out and hires a Boston medieval stained glass artist. And this is what he comes up with. So this is early 1930s understanding of medieval stained glass. But you just saw original. So does it look the same? I'm not sure. There it is. There it is. So you decide. Now, I was fortunate enough to get the correspondence between Dean Emerson and Wilbur Burnham as they put the windows in. I found that the Burnham studio had been closed, and they shipped all their records to the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian in Washington. I was hoping there was correspondence between the cathedral and the studio when these windows were put in. So I was telling Adrian, I used some of my travel money, little that I had at Cleveland State, bought a plane ticket to go to Washington. I got to the airport, Hopkins Airport. It was one of those storms that never quits that have been going on for 3 days. And the guy at the gate said, "You're going to be here a while because the whole East Coast is shut down. Nothing is moving. Nothing is coming from the West." So I said, forget it. So I turned my ticket in. Another passenger grabbed it right away. And I went home, I called the Archives of American Art at the Smithsonian, and lo and behold, the woman said, "Oh, I know where that is." I could hear her heels click in the telephone as she went down the hall. She came back and she said, "Yeah, there's a big file of correspondence. My supervisor isn't here right now, so I'm going to Xerox it and send it to you. I'm going to copy it." So I got this big bundle of paper, and it was all this back and forth between Wilbur Burnham and Chester Emerson. And I did an article, and I called it "Frankly, I'm Troubled," because that was one of the dean's letters to Wilbur Burnham. It was in October, this time of year. It was early in the 1930s, I forget which year. And he said, "I'm standing here in Trinity Cathedral. There's bright sunlight in the cathedral, and these windows are too much. they're too bright, they're too red, they're too blue, they're too green. The congregation is grumbling. They don't like the windows. So what are you going to do about it? So, and then, this is when the mail was like 2 or 3 deliveries a day, so there's a response that said, well, listen, Dean, I'll have my man come and we'll see about covering the windows. Maybe we can cut down on the light. And also, I've visited Cleveland many times, and your air quality will take care of the situation. But finally, I have to tell you, your congregation is woefully ignorant about stained glass. They're used to the old-fashioned glass like we have in the chapel. We don't have an example here, but that's old, mid-19th century. It's not even stained glass, because stained glass is little pieces of colored glass put together. The windows we have in the chapel are from the old Trinity downtown, across from the library, and those are just painted pieces of glass, which have washed out. He said, that's what your congregation is interested in. That's what they're used to. They don't know anything about stained glass. I'll take care of it. So he must have, because all the windows were put in. Each had a donor. They have to go to the donors. They would talk with the donors. They would figure out what they wanted the story they wanted. First of all, they had to decide on what story to tell. And it was Burnham who pushed them into telling the story of Jesus. Since the big stained glass windows we already had in the cathedral that you can see from the Hardman Studios in Manchester, England, those cover the big themes. The one above the Reredos, all the church fathers and mothers, and other sorted individuals, the nativity window. So those stories had all been covered. So Burnham said, well, it's a no-brainer. Why don't you tell the life of Jesus? So, okay. So they would do a cartoon. They would show it to the donor. And then finally, they would work it up and put all the windows in. And I think it took until 1938 or 39 before they got the last window put in.
So you could, Adrian, preaching the gospel, preaching a lesson.
Could preach the windows.
Refer.
Yeah, you could preach the windows. Yeah.
The windows.
Mm-hmm.
You could, yes.
Or you could at least
Refer to them.
Such a window.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be a great idea.
Yeah.
So these went in, but Emerson said, don't worry about the crucifixion, because I have a window for that. So let's look at that window.
Which one? Was that this one?
Yes. So this was the crucifixion window that Emerson said he had. It's called, in my notes, Trinity has referred to this as the entombment and nailing window. The entombment and nailing window. Jim Whitney told me late 15th century, perhaps from Germany. And you can see the cityscape looks like a medieval city. There's Jesus, the nailing, and then there's the entombment. Now, I was telling Adrian, there are 3 of these windows. 2 are in the Toledo Museum of Art. How this one got here, I don't know. There's no record that I've ever found.
Somebody Xeroxed it and set it when their boss wasn't around.
That's right.
It's like spiritual Xerox.
This is how we do it in Cleveland.
That's right, exactly right. Now, I told you about storytelling. So when I was, first learning about the windows, and before I did a whole lot of research, I listened to the stories, and the person who was instructing me, So now, Mark, I want you to look at this window because it's very interesting because these Germans are drinking beer. I got that beer right there on the ledge. So, you know, like an idiot, I must have taken five tours through, and I always told them that, and then nobody said anything. I took a group through, and I told them, and they were horrified. This can't be. You know, you can't have people drinking beer while they're entombing Jesus. And then I realized, of course, these are the anointing jokes. So, you know, the branch and I fell down together. They still gave me a tip, which I turned to ginger. But so you gotta watch the, you know, where you get your information. Now, later on, I got our dean at the time, Tracy Lynn, got a letter from somebody that had more information about this, and that's how we found out about the Toledo Museum of Art. And so Jim said late 15th century, perhaps Cologne, Germany. We had an art historian here in the congregation, and she told me, except for the triptych, which you can see in the chapel, she thought this was the oldest thing in the cathedral. So I don't know. But again, you can see the actual 15th century supposedly window, compare it with the Burnham style, and then compare it with the window in the transept. That window in the transept has another mirror image, another window on the other side of the other transept. So they'll both be worked on eventually, and then they'll be restored. They were bowing out, which is you know, extremely dangerous. The mystery of the aisle windows, the life of Christ, the mystery. This is not a Burnham window, but it's in with all the other windows. Now, how it follows the story, there it is, paying homage to the baby Jesus. It's got a dedication to the Foote family. It was put in when the other windows were put in the 1930s. But how? What is it? So Jim Whitney, and again, you only have this, it's hearsay, it's not, he told me, I'm telling you. He liked a Cleveland stained glass artist named R. Toland Wright. He was a big deal in American stained glass. He had a studio here in Cleveland. And Jim had one of his windows in his living room. I used to look at it when I went over to visit. It looked like this. Not exactly, but because it was different, but it had the same dimensions and it looked like this. And he said, I think what you have there is a window that was put in, and that's an R. Toland Wright window. Now, why would they do that? So I did some extra research, and maybe people know this. I didn't realize this. All these windows were put in the 30s, from the early 30s, I think, to 1938, 37, 38. R. Toland Wright died in 1934, unexpectedly. His widow gave a lot of his art to the Cleveland Museum of Art. I think she gave Trinity one of his windows as a memorial to her husband. And we put it in, but then we forgot to memorialize it. So I think it's a memorial. And I've had people come up to me and say, this looks different. And it is different. And I think it's our memorial, although we've forgotten it, to R. Toland Wright. So that is a mystery. Now I will just end saying, I always try to talk to the tours about connections. It's no secret that Christianity calls upon its connections, even if it's just to the Bible. But the Episcopal Church is particularly sensitive to the connection because of the episcopate. So our bishops go back to Peter. And so we are the Episcopal Church in the United States. That's important to us, and the connections are important. Whereas the mother church for us is the Anglican Church. So, obviously when they broke with the Catholics, the fact that they were English or Angles instead of Catholics was important in Britain or in England at the time. But we are the U.S. Episcopal Church, EUSA, Episcopal Church in the United States of America. And here at Trinity, consciously or not, we have these connections. The chapel in particular, the windows and the plaques connect us with the early Trinity downtown. And these windows are connected to the earlier windows that we looked at as we try to maintain the connections. Now, I'm not sure that Dean Emerson was thinking about connections when he started his effort to fill in the windows in the nave aisles, but nevertheless, we have these connections, and the plaques are part of that. Those are personal testaments to people who have served the church in its other location where it was in the 19th century. So these connections are important. Now, what is going to be our next connection? This was the last big building project we had in terms of stained glass. And here, 90 years later, we're finally getting around to repairing. But we still have unfinished windows. You can see them, those yellow windows. Those could be housed stained glass. So if we want to, if we don't want to just be a museum, but we want to demonstrate our living faith in a tangible way, it's time to start looking at those plain windows for our next connection. What is our next connection going to be? And now we're caught up. I'm on the justice ministry, and we just had a great meeting here in this room, a parish meeting. And if we want to do something to symbolize our interest in diversification, in broadening the word beyond what these people thought it was when they worked on these windows, it's a chance for us to take these plain windows and call upon the talents of African American stained glass artists. There are plenty of them. Or, whatever other, as long as, they're diverse, and get some different stories into the windows. So we can say our windows match our belief in diversification. And it's not a cheap process. So we can look.
Oh yeah, you want to see the.
Here is almost $82,000 that we're going to spend on 5 windows. We've got like 75.
Yeah.
This is just a start.
Yeah.
When I go into the Clement Heaton window, this is one of the big names in American stained glass. This is next to the baptismal font, bulging in all 4 panels. This is one of those, the west transept, those old 15th century windows I was talking about. Bulging, breakage, bulging. The Clark window, bulging. Clark, that's named for the family that put the window in. I think he was a Supreme Court justice. So this is just 5 windows. So we have a big challenge in keeping the windows up. And we also have a challenge if we want to try to have our plain glass turned into some new way to symbolize what we believed in here at Trinity Cathedral. I was an usher a couple weeks ago. My wife and I volunteer as usher, not usher, greeter. I let her do the back door because that's where the people come in to the front. There was a woman visiting with her son. I think you were laying out the bulletins. Yeah. And they were going around taking pictures, so, greeter, you better greet, So I went in and I talked to them. They were from Seattle. They were from the Seattle Cathedral. They were taking pictures of our stained glass. And I told them, don't forget in our narthex, in our front porch, we have 1960s space windows. So those are modern, 1960s modern. They were put in by the Cleveland Parimba stained glass studio. And they captured it in the 1960s. There's a space capsule in it. There's modern technology, not modern technology back in the 60s. A whole different vibe from what we've got here. They stayed about 10 seconds. That's not what they're used to, and that's not what they were interested in. So breaking through to a new type of story, or and I shouldn't even say it that way, to a diverse story, and bringing people along with us is going to be a challenge. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Do we have photographs of the window behind the organ, the flame truck?
Good question. I don't.
Okay.
Bill DeToro says he's been up there. He says it's gorgeous.
You can see corners of it if you stand in the right spots, but I don't know if we had a photo record of.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's a good question.
There's
Now,
one, I know in the chapter room, there's one photograph that actually looks towards that direction before the organ was in. It's black and white and the sun's shining in, so everything's washed out.
yeah. It would maybe, it's interesting because Whitney Studio went up there because when we went through this to prepare for what we're going to, and they said, that's not in bad shape. That was a disappointment to me because I thought
I'm going to see it.
Yeah. They said it's actually not in bad shape. And continue that, it gets all the rattle from the traffic and everything. But that was when we put the organ in, that was a big, that aggravated the bishop at the time.
It changed the lighting too.
It changed the lighting. He was ticked off. So that's a good question.
What's the story of the Tiffany in the sacristy?
And why nobody else can see it.
Yeah, it's this gorgeous window of an angel.
I don't know.
We don't know the story?
Jim Whitney said it was Tiffany-like. And I think, although he didn't really know, it definitely looks like a Tiffany. But Tiffany had a big factory going, and he had, like little Raphaels were going around painting, He had little Tiffany's running around painting stuff, or making stained glass. So I don't know if that, it's definitely, Tiffany, but if it's really Lewis Comfort Tiffany, I don't know. But yeah, and then the other thing is, why put it back there?
It's beautiful.
Yeah,
Absolutely
it is
stunning.
beautiful.
Yeah, it's stunning.
Every time I quit taking tours back there, because every time I took back, people were undressing, and it's like, this is not right. So I just,
From vestments, let's be clear.
yeah. When they're doing my class. So anyway, that's also a good question. And I guess they left I
Well,
don't
that wasn't
think,
always the sacristy though, was it? I heard that there was the dean's office at one time before all of this
interesting.
was built.
Could be.
that's true.
Oh,
But the
that could be
dean's-
why.
That's true. That was the dean's office.
Mm,
Yes.
interesting.
So I guess more people would have seen it back then.
Yeah, and it would have been appreciated every day probably with someone in there.
Yeah, you never know. I found going through, well, first of all, when I was in the Undercroft, the basement, when we were looking for records, I found Chester Emerson's travel gear. His little case and all that, so that went upstairs somewhere. And then years before, I was in the chapter room here, going through the closets, and I found an authenticated, signed, framed Beatles photographs.
Ah, huh.
Wow.
Well, thank you, Michael. Again, any final questions or still more stories to tell? That's for sure.
Oh, yeah.